I don't really know what made me bring up the old place again. Maybe it was the silence in the truck after Mom's funeral. Maybe it was just needing something to fill the air that didn't hurt to talk about. The 2-hour drive back from the church in Montgomery was rough. Neither of us said much, and the tension between me and my brother Lane felt heavier than the Alabama humidity outside. It had been years since we talked much, let alone went anywhere together. We were two different people by now. Still, I said it. I said, we should go camping again, like back in high school. Lane looked over. One eye squinted at the sun, then back to the road. He didn't say anything for a while, just drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. Then he gave a little nod. Yeah, all right. We were both 28. It had been 10 years since we last camped together, maybe more. There was this old spot near the border of Georgia, down by a dried-up creek and surrounded by pine and scrub. It was on private land, but we used to sneak in through a hole in the fence behind a closed-down gas station off Route 31. Not much patrolling out there back then. We figured it would be even quieter now. We made plans that night just 2 days out. It was late June 2023, already getting real hot, and most folks we knew were heading to the beach or staying in the city. Not us. We loaded up Lane's truck, tents, 2 rifles, cooler, a case of Budweiser, freeze-dried food, our old packs from back in the day. I still had mine from ROTC, dusty and stiff, but it did the job. We left just before sunset, headed southeast. The road out was mostly empty, a straight shot through miles of flat, forgotten land. By the time we reached the gas station, it was past 10. The place was still boarded up, even more run down than I remembered. Broken glass glittered across the concrete, and weeds choked out the parking lot. We killed the lights and pulled around back, slipping through the fence just like old times. The path was still there, though narrower now, hemmed in by brush and vines. We hiked by headlamp, the light bouncing off beetle shells and spider webs. The air buzzed with insects and thick summer heat. Lane walked ahead, boots crunching dry leaves, his frame solid and wide. He'd put on weight since high school, grown a beard too. Looked older than me even though we were twins. It took maybe 20 minutes to reach the clearing. Still the same as before, open, flat, ringed with trees. The fire pit was half collapsed, but we could still see where we used to dig it out. I felt a strange twist in my stomach seeing it again, like looking at the ghost of a memory, but more real. We set up camp quickly, pitched our tents side by side, gathered up wood, cracked open 2 beers. We sat by the fire for hours, watching the flames eat away the dry branches and tossing bottle caps into the pit. Lane talked more than usual about work, about how his ex took the dog, about how he was thinking of moving to Kentucky. I mostly just listened. I didn't say much about my own life. Nothing really worth talking about. A bad job at a warehouse, a string of bad relationships, a studio apartment that smelled like mildew no matter how often I cleaned it. Around 2 a.m. we crashed. It was still warm out, and I left my rainfly half off for air. I listened to the wind in the trees and bugs in the brush and eventually slipped into sleep. When I woke up, it was already light. Lane was sitting outside his tent, cleaning his rifle. I got up, stretched, and walked over. We made some instant coffee, dry and bitter, but it got the job done. I asked if he wanted to go shooting. We hiked down to the creek bed. It was bone dry, nothing but cracked earth and old bottles, but it made a decent backstop. We set up some cans on a log and took turns firing. The sharp cracks echoed off the trees. Felt good in a weird way, familiar, like we were kids again, just messing around in the woods. No responsibilities, no regrets. But around noon, things started to shift. I heard an engine. We both froze. Lane looked at me, then up the hill. We crouched low. The sound got closer, big tires on gravel, slow and steady. Then we saw it. A white pickup truck with a sheriff's star on the side, crawling down the path like it owned the place. We ducked down behind a ridge. My stomach twisted. We were on private land. Trespassing, armed, drinking. Not a good look. Lane whispered, "Shit." I nodded. We waited, hoping they'd just keep driving. But the truck stopped up by the clearing. I heard doors open. Voices. At least 2 of them. Maybe 3. then footsteps crunching toward the tents. I motioned for Lane to stay. He shook his head and crept up the ridge, slow and careful. He peeked over the top, then slid back down. 2 cops, looking through our stuff. "What do we do?" I mouthed. He didn't answer. He just looked off to the side, jaw clenched. We waited a few more minutes. Then the footsteps came closer. They were headed our way now, cutting down the trail toward the creek. Panicked, I stashed my rifle in the brush and moved further into the trees. Lane stayed crouched. He was holding his gun low but tight. They came into view fast. 2 deputies, one older, one younger. Both in brown uniforms, pistols at their sides, hands on holsters. What happened next? It happened fast. The younger cop spotted Lane. He shouted something I couldn't hear, hand twitching toward his belt. Lane stood up too quick. Rifle in hand, probably just to put it down, but it didn't look right. A shot cracked, then another. I saw Lane stumble, then collapse backward into the dry creek bed. The older cop yelled something, then both of them ran forward. I couldn't move. I felt like ice, like something inside me had shut off completely. They surrounded Lane. He wasn't moving. Blood soaked into the cracked earth beneath him. I stayed hidden for hours, long after they called it in, long after more units came. I heard radios crackling, boots trampling the brush, saw flashing red and blue through the trees. Eventually, they left, took Lane's body, took our gear, taped off the area. But they never found me. I waited until night fell. Then I crawled back to the truck, still parked behind the gas station. I drove home with no headlights, heart pounding the whole way. They said Lane pointed his rifle at them, said it was justified, self-defense. I didn't say a word, not to them, not to anyone. I didn't even go to the second funeral. Couldn't. It's been 9 months now. I moved out of the city, got a job working nights at a rest stop in Mississippi. Quiet work, no questions, but I see it every night. Lane standing there, rifle in hand. The exact moment the cop raised his gun. The shock on my brother's face before he hit the ground. I replay it every time I close my eyes. I still have dreams where I scream, but no sound comes out. Sometimes I wonder if I'd done something different. Said something, stepped in, made him drop the rifle faster, if he'd still be here. But there's no changing it. They said he was a threat, but I knew him. He was my brother, and he never even got the safety off. It was the fall of 2013 when I decided to take some time off and head out to the high desert of New Mexico. I'd been living in Colorado Springs for about 3 years, working long shifts as a mechanic. My back was always sore, my hands always cut up, and my head always tired. I needed a break from the noise, the metal, and the people, so I packed up my old Chevy Tahoe and took off south. I'd been eyeing a spot near the Gila National Forest, somewhere out past reserve. The maps showed a few dirt forest roads branching off into deep scrubland, cliffs, and a couple of remote canyons. It wasn't a national campground or anything. It was just a chunk of BLM land where nobody really went, especially not in the colder months. That's what I wanted. I brought a tent, a sleeping bag rated for 20 degrees, a hatchet, a propane stove, 2 gallons of water, and a cooler stuffed with eggs, sausage, rice, and some fruit. I also brought my Ruger .357 with 6 rounds in the cylinder and 12 more in a plastic case. I didn't plan on needing it, but out there you carry. Coyotes, maybe a mountain lion, or just in case some meth head wandered too far from wherever he cooked. I got there late in the afternoon after almost 7 hours of driving. The road in was rough, a washboard gravel path that dropped off into steep drainages. Every 100 yards or so, you'd see burned out trees or skeletons of old trailers melted down to their frames from wildfires years back. I drove maybe 6 more miles into the scrub, then pulled off into a clearing behind a couple of juniper trees. Nobody would see me from the road. That was the goal. I set up camp quick. The tent went up in under 10 minutes. I stacked some dead wood for later, even though I wasn't sure if I'd build a fire. I cracked a beer, heated up some rice and sausage on the propane stove, and watched the sun sink into a dark orange haze over the ridges to the west. Coyotes started their whining a little after dusk. It didn't bother me. That part felt right. The first night was calm. Cold air slid down into the canyon just after midnight, but I stayed warm. I woke up once, maybe around 3 in the morning, to pee. The sky was full of stars, and I didn't hear anything out of place. Just a few owls calling from the far trees. The next day, I decided to hike down the hill to a dry creek bed about a mile out. I left the tent behind but brought a day pack, my Ruger, and a bottle of water. The canyon twisted between steep rock walls with scattered pinyon trees clinging to ledges. I followed the dry wash down for a bit and spotted some old boot tracks, maybe a day or two old. Could have been a hunter, maybe someone else hiking. The tread was deep and narrow, not the kind of print you'd see from someone just wandering barefoot. The prints headed north, deeper into the canyon. I didn't follow them far. When I got back to camp, it was early afternoon. I ate, drank water, and stretched out under the trees for a while. That's when I noticed the tire tracks. Faint but fresh. They cut across the dry grass about 30 yards from where I'd parked. I hadn't seen them when I came in. These were new. I walked over and bent down. You could still smell the rubber a bit, like someone had passed through maybe a few hours before. But they didn't lead anywhere near my sight, just cut through the scrub and headed east, vanishing past a bend in the trees. Put me on edge, not because someone had been out there, but because I hadn't seen or heard them. I figured maybe it was just a rancher or someone checking fence lines. Still, I unzipped my duffel and slid the Ruger into the side pouch. Better to have it close. That night, the wind picked up. You could hear it pushing through the brush, dry leaves scraping against tent fabric. I didn't sleep well. Around midnight, I heard a metallic clink. Just once. Short and dull, like something hit the side of the Tahoe. I froze and held my breath, ears straining for footsteps, for anything. But nothing came after that. Just the wind. In the morning, I walked around the Tahoe. Nothing obvious. No dents, no marks, no prints in the dirt. Could have been something falling from a tree, maybe an animal brushing past it. But the air felt heavier, like I wasn't out here alone anymore. I ate quick and decided to hike back toward the creek bed again. But this time I moved slower. I checked every print I passed, looked for changes in the ground. I found nothing new until I came back. That afternoon, as I reached the camp again, I spotted something. A shirt. It was about 20 feet from my tent, tangled in a patch of thorn bush. Light gray, long-sleeved, with what looked like a red flannel lining. It hadn't been there before. The fabric was torn in places, not like it snagged on something, more like it had been cut. I looked around for more, but didn't find anything else. No footprints, no dropped gear, no trail, just that shirt like it had been thrown there. I burned it. I didn't know why. I just didn't want to touch it again. I doused it in fuel from the stove and watched it burn to ash. The flames were low and hot, and I stayed on edge the rest of the night. I didn't leave the tent again once I zipped it up. The next morning, I packed. I told myself I'd had enough rest, that it wasn't worth the weird feeling sitting on the back of my neck. But when I got in the Tahoe, the battery was dead. I didn't leave the dome light on. The door had been shut. Nothing else had been running. I popped the hood and saw the wires to the battery were clean cut. Not chewed, not frayed, cut like with a knife. That's when the real weight of it hit me. Somebody had been there, not just driving past. They'd walked into camp, maybe while I was asleep, maybe while I was out hiking. They'd cut the lines clean and left me stranded. I kept calm. I had jumper cables, but no second vehicle. No cell signal either. Just miles of dry land and one dirt road heading back to pavement. I sat in the front seat trying to think. I still had food, and I could ration water, but the idea of waiting around for someone to pass by didn't sit right. Especially not after the shirt. Not after the battery. By noon, I'd made up my mind. I stuffed my backpack with food, water, the Ruger, and set out on foot. I followed the road east, hoping to reach the main highway by nightfall. I figured it was maybe 10 miles. I kept a steady pace, checking behind me every so often. I made it about 5 before I heard the engine. Not from ahead of me, from behind. I turned and saw the dust cloud first, then the shape of a white SUV coming fast, too fast for that road. It was at least a half-mile back, but gaining. I ran. I didn't think. I just dove off the road and into the scrub, heading downhill into the dry creek bed. I crouched low and moved between rocks, thorns tearing at my pants and arms. The engine got louder, then it stopped. A door slammed, then another. I heard feet on the gravel. I stayed low, crawling deeper under a ledge. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe heavy. I just kept the Ruger in my hand and my back against stone. After maybe 5 minutes, I heard them again. 2 sets of footsteps moving through the brush. One sounded heavier, slower. The other was quicker, impatient. One of them kicked something. Then they both went silent. I stayed put for over an hour, long after the footsteps faded, long after the engine started again and the SUV tore off into the distance. I waited until the sun dropped below the canyon wall and the air went cold. I didn't go back to the road. Instead, I climbed the canyon ridge and moved parallel to it, keeping the road in view from up high. I moved slow, careful. My legs cramped, and the weight of the bag dug into my shoulders. But I didn't stop until I saw the faint glow of headlights on pavement in the distance. It was almost midnight when I reached the highway. I flagged down a trucker about an hour later, waving both arms from the ditch. He was kind enough to stop and call the sheriff when he dropped me in town. They towed the Tahoe out the next morning. The mechanic in reserve confirmed it. Clean cuts on both battery wires, not frayed, not chewed. The sheriff didn't ask many questions, just told me I was lucky and said it wasn't the first time hikers had gone missing in those parts. Meth labs, old fugitives, people living off the grid. He didn't say much more. I never went back to New Mexico after that, and I've never gone camping alone again. I was 22 when I went camping with my grandmother in the hills north of Asheville, North Carolina. It was early October of 2013, the kind of season where the air gets sharp at night, but the sun still warms your skin during the day. I had just finished a rough year of college and was taking time off, drifting between part-time jobs and losing myself in long drives. My grandmother, Ruth, was 74 then, still sharp and steady on her feet, tougher than she looked. She'd grown up in the Appalachian Mountains, spent most of her life in quiet places, and always seemed more at home outdoors than inside any building. When I told her I needed to get away, she suggested a 3-night camping trip to a place she hadn't been to in years, Deer Hollow. Deer Hollow wasn't on any map we could find. Not really. It was more of a local name passed down in her generation. It was nestled in a pocket of forest between 2 steep ridges off a forgotten service road branching from a quiet 2-lane highway. The place had been part of a bigger logging route from the 1950s, but when the timber dried up, so did the traffic. Now it was just old dirt trails overgrown with moss and ferns. Grandma said it used to be a good spot for spotting deer and wild turkeys, and that it had a stream good for catching smallmouth bass if the water was running strong. We left on a Thursday morning in her rusty 1998 Ford Ranger. The bed packed with a heavy old canvas tent, thick wool blankets, lanterns, a little propane stove, and 2 coolers full of food. The drive took nearly 5 hours. We stopped at a gas station in a town called Marion to grab coffee and stretch our legs, then kept climbing up the hills until the pavement turned to gravel. Eventually, we found the unmarked service road she remembered. It was almost invisible, choked with weeds and young saplings. She told me to drive slow, and we bounced and creaked up that road for what felt like another hour before we reached the clearing. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not just quiet, true silence, thick and strange. No cars, no phones, no wind. Only the occasional chirp of a bird or the rustle of a squirrel in the underbrush. The clearing was overgrown, but flat enough to pitch the tent. The old fire ring was still there, a circle of blackened stones and charred logs, mostly covered in moss. A narrow path led away from the clearing into thicker woods, and Grandma said it went down to the stream. We set up camp by late afternoon. I worked the tent stakes while she arranged the cooking gear. We ate sandwiches, lit a fire, and sat watching the trees go dark under a violet sky. That first night was calm. Cold, but calm. I remember waking up once around 3 a.m. and needing to pee. I unzipped the tent and stepped into the chilly night. The woods were black and still, with stars peeking between tree branches. I stayed close, not wanting to lose my bearings, then crawled back in and fell asleep. The second day started with fog. Thick, white mist clung to everything, muffling sound and making the woods feel closer, tighter. I could barely see past the edge of the clearing. Grandma didn't seem bothered. She made instant coffee and scrambled eggs on the stove, wrapped in her thick green jacket, her white hair tied back in a bun. She said fog like that always burned off by noon, and it did, slowly lifting as the sun climbed. By early afternoon, we decided to walk down to the stream. We followed the path, which was barely visible now, just a narrow cut in the forest floor covered in leaves and vines. Every now and then I'd spot a rusted nail in a tree or an old marker post with faded red paint. The stream was still there, shallow, winding through a small ravine. The water was clearer than anything I'd seen in the city, running cold over rocks and fallen branches. We sat on a flat stone near the bank and just listened. It was peaceful. I skipped some stones. Grandma showed me how to spot fish shadows under the ripples. I remember her telling me something about always respecting quiet places, how stillness could mean peace, but sometimes it meant something was watching. I didn't really think much of it at the time. We went back to the camp in the late afternoon and cooked a bigger meal, canned chili, crackers, apples. That night felt a little different. The silence had changed. It wasn't just quiet anymore. Felt tense, like something was holding its breath. We both noticed it, I think, though neither of us said a word. Around midnight, I woke up again. This time I hadn't needed to pee. I just jolted awake like something had shaken me. I lay still, listening. The fire had burned out. The tent was cold. There was a faint crunch outside. Not close, but not far either. I held my breath. Another crunch, like a footstep, careful and slow. I didn't move. I didn't even reach for the flashlight. After a few minutes, it stopped. I told myself it was a deer, maybe a raccoon, but it wasn't random. The way the steps moved, it was slow, deliberate, and circled halfway around the tent before fading out into the woods. I barely slept the rest of that night. The third day was colder. The sun never came out. Clouds rolled in early and just hung there, low and gray. We didn't hike anywhere, just stayed around the tent, gathering firewood, trying to stay warm. Around midday, I found something strange near the edge of the path to the stream. Fresh shoe prints. Human. Not mine. Not Grandma's. They were deeper, wider, like a boot print, sunk clean into the soft earth. One set, coming from the woods, not toward them. I called Grandma over, and she frowned when she saw them. She didn't say anything, just stood staring at them for a long time, like trying to remember something. That night, we both stayed up later. We kept the fire going longer. Neither of us said anything about the prints, but we both kept glancing at the woods. I didn't sleep at all. Sometime past midnight, there were sounds again. Same slow steps. Not charging, not crashing through. Just quiet movements through leaves, like someone trying not to be heard. I had the flashlight in my hand, but I didn't use it. I was too scared it might show something I didn't want to see. The next morning, we agreed to leave early. We packed fast, skipped breakfast, just threw things in the truck, folded the tent roughly, didn't care about dirt or proper storage. Grandma was tense. Her face looked older that morning, drawn and pale. As I climbed into the driver's seat, she turned around one last time and looked at the woods like she was trying to memorize them. I started the truck and we backed out onto the service road. About 2 miles down, we saw something that made my stomach drop. A pair of deep tire tracks cutting through the brush, fresh. The mud was still soft, the tracks still wet at the bottom. They weren't ours. They had come in, not out. And whoever had driven in had done so recently after we had arrived. There had been someone else up there. We didn't talk much on the way back to Asheville. We stopped once to get gas, then again for food. That night, we stayed at her place. I slept on the old couch. I didn't have nightmares, but I didn't sleep easy either. A few days later, I did something I hadn't planned to do. I went back alone. I didn't tell Grandma. I just needed to see for myself, to know I hadn't imagined it. I waited until late morning, drove out with a full tank, and took that same gravel road all the way back up to the service road. But I couldn't find the entrance. It was gone, grown over, like it had never been there. I spent 2 hours driving up and down the gravel road, eyes scanning every ditch, every sapling, every overgrowth. Nothing. I eventually turned around, heart pounding, palms sweaty on the wheel. Later that year, Grandma got sick. Lung cancer. It moved fast. She passed the next spring. She never mentioned Deer Hollow again, not once. I still don't know if she had seen something back then that she didn't want to talk about. Maybe something from her childhood. Maybe something she'd heard stories about. All I know is what I remember. The silence, the footprints, the movements at night, and the tire tracks that didn't belong. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a monster. It was something real, flesh and blood. Someone who had been out there watching, maybe waiting. And if we had stayed another night, maybe we would have met them. But we didn't. We left just in time. And sometimes that's enough. I was 32 that summer. My name is Evan. I worked as a freelance tech consultant, mostly from home, and I had finally carved out a week just for myself. No meetings, no emails, no expectations. It was June of 2019, and I picked a remote patch of forest in western Arkansas to go camping, somewhere between Mulberry Mountain and the edge of the Ozark National Forest. The area was marked on an old hiking forum I'd stumbled across. They called it Black Rock Valley. It wasn't on most maps, and I liked that. I didn't want to camp near an RV park or some family with screaming kids. I wanted isolation, solitude, the kind you feel in your chest when you shut off your car and hear nothing but wind and insects. I packed the truck with the basics. A canvas tent, a decent sleeping bag, 3 days worth of food, a cooler, a small but loud air horn for bears, a hunting knife I didn't know how to use, and a first aid kit. I had an emergency radio, 2 lighters, a box of waterproof matches, and a solar charger for my phone. I even brought a book I never ended up opening. I arrived mid-afternoon on a Tuesday and parked at a gravel pull-off about half a mile from the valley rim. The sky was overcast and thick, like soup. The forecast had said light showers, maybe, but nothing major. I wasn't worried. The trail leading down into the valley was thin, half swallowed by overgrowth. I had to push through wet branches and knock spider webs out of my face every few yards. It took nearly 45 minutes to make my way down to the floor of the valley, and by the time I got there, I was sweating and covered in tiny scratches. The space opened up into a wide, uneven clearing flanked by thin trees and tall grass. In the center, there was a patch of flat ground, dry for now, with just enough space for my tent. Beyond that, to the north, a ridge loomed, jagged and steep, and I could see massive dark rocks embedded into its side. That must have been where the name came from, Black Rock Valley. There was no one around, no trash, no boot prints, just the sounds of birds and the occasional drip of leftover rainwater from the trees. I set up the tent by 5. It was humid, but manageable. I made a small fire pit with rocks and used twigs to start a slow-burning flame. I didn't light it yet, just wanted to have it ready. Dinner that night was simple. A sandwich, a granola bar, and some trail mix. The air was heavy with moisture, and just before I crawled into my sleeping bag, I heard the first rumble of thunder way off in the distance. The kind that sounds like it's rolling across the entire sky. It started raining around 2 a.m. Not a light drizzle, but a steady, soaking rain that tapped hard on the top of the tent and slid down the sides like a waterfall. I stayed warm and dry mostly. My tent was new, waterproof, and I had picked a good spot. No pooling water, no leaks. I drifted back into sleep and didn't wake again until morning. Wednesday was worse. The rain hadn't stopped. It just kept falling, slow and constant. The firewood I had gathered the day before was already wet. I managed to get some heat from a piece of waxed fire starter I kept in my emergency pack, but it sputtered out fast. I didn't need the fire, not really, but the heat would have been nice. I spent most of the day inside the tent reading nutrition labels on wrappers and listening to the rain. I'd brought a cheap camp chair, and I moved it under a wide tree to eat lunch, just to be outside a bit. There were no signs of animals, no signs of people. I liked the quiet at first. It was deep, pure, but something about the rain made everything feel slow and fragile, like the world was getting soggy and could fall apart at any second. By Thursday morning, things started to go sideways. The trail I had used to get into the valley, it was gone, washed out. I went up to check it, hoping to maybe hike out early if the weather didn't break. But all I found was a sloping stream of mud and torn tree roots. The rain had carved a gash into the side of the ridge, and it looked like half the trail had just slid down overnight. I tried walking part of it anyway, grabbing onto branches and digging my boots in. I slipped after 5 minutes and nearly tore my shoulder open on a sharp rock. That was enough for me. I slid back down to camp and checked my phone. No signal. Of course, I had one bar when I'd parked the truck. I hadn't had service since I came into the valley, and I hadn't expected it, but still, it felt different now. Heavier, like I'd crossed some line from camping into surviving. That night, the wind picked up. The rain was loud, deafening even, and something about the way the wind moved through the trees made it sound like voices, like a crowd mumbling behind glass. I stayed awake most of the night with my eyes open, watching shadows twist on the ceiling of my tent. I told myself it was just the wind, and it was, but that didn't make it any easier to sleep. Friday morning, I woke up to the sound of something moving near the tent. Not a squirrel, not a bird, something big. I didn't move. I just lay there, heart pounding. I could hear the crunch of wet leaves, soft, slow steps just outside. I held my breath. I didn't want to call out. I didn't want to make noise at all. The steps circled the tent once, maybe twice, then stopped. I waited. 5 minutes, 10. Then I unzipped the flap slowly and peeked outside. Nothing, but I could see boot prints. Fresh ones. Not mine. Too big. Too wide. Maybe a size 12 or 13. They were deep in the mud, leading from the edge of the clearing to the side of my tent. Then they disappeared into the brush on the north side. I froze. I hadn't seen another person since I left the truck. Who the hell had come through here in the middle of the night? I grabbed the air horn and the knife, though I didn't really know what I would have done with either. I scanned the tree line for movement but saw nothing, just dripping branches and the slick rock wall of the ridge. I didn't want to stay another night, but I didn't have much choice. The trail was still destroyed, and I didn't have rope or climbing gear. I decided to pack my things in case I needed to move fast. I kept the knife close, tucked into my waistband. I stuffed most of my food into the bear bag and tied it high in the trees. I didn't eat much, couldn't. My stomach felt like a fist. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there in full clothes with the air horn in one hand and the knife in the other, listening. The rain got heavier, the wind louder. I kept imagining the sound of those footsteps, and every time I heard a snap outside, a stick or a branch, I flinched. At one point, I thought I saw a figure, just past the tent door, tall, still, but it could have been a tree. My brain was stretched so tight I was seeing things, hearing things. That night felt like it lasted a year. By Saturday morning, the rain had finally stopped. The sky was still dark with clouds, but there was a break, just enough sunlight to make the trees glow a little. I didn't waste time. I packed everything. My tent was soaked and heavy, and I didn't care. I stuffed it into its bag and slung it over my back. I didn't eat. I just grabbed a water bottle and the horn, and I started moving toward the southern ridge where the slope was lower. It wasn't a trail. Not really. Just a steep, uneven rise covered in slick leaves and rocks. I clawed my way up, grabbing at anything I could find. Roots, bark, loose branches. I fell twice, scraped my knees open, banged my shoulder against a tree, but I kept going. Halfway up, I looked back, just for a second, and I saw someone, standing near the center of the clearing, exactly where my tent had been. They weren't moving, just standing there. No backpack, no gear, just dark clothes and long arms. I couldn't see their face. I didn't wait. I pushed myself up the rest of the ridge, half crawling, until I broke through the tree line and saw the forest floor flatten out again. I ran the last quarter-mile back to the truck. When I got there, the driver's side door was wide open. The glove box was torn open. My maps were shredded. The back window was cracked like someone had hit it with a rock. Nothing else was missing. My wallet was still there. My gear untouched. Just the strange destruction, like someone had broken in just to let me know they were there. I drove. Didn't stop until I reached a gas station almost 30 miles out. I sat in the parking lot with the engine running and both doors locked for over an hour, trying to catch my breath. I never went back to that place. I told myself it was probably a hunter, maybe someone living off-grid, but I don't believe that. Whoever it was had followed me into the valley without a sound. They waited until the rain was at its worst, and they watched me. Maybe they were watching the whole time. I filed a report with the sheriff's office in the next county over. They said they'd check it out. I never heard back. I didn't expect to. Now, whenever I camp, I stay in known sites, near people, near roads. I bring more gear, a satellite phone, a signal beacon, and I never, ever go camping when the forecast says rain. It was late October 2019. I was 32 years old, burned out from work, and still feeling the weight of a breakup from earlier that summer. I lived in Salt Lake City back then, working for a plumbing company, and I'd been saving up all year to take some time off in the fall. I didn't want to go anywhere fancy or far, just needed to get away from people, the sound of traffic, emails, phones, everything. I'd done a few solo camping trips before, nothing crazy, but I figured it'd be a good time to go alone again. There's a patch of national forest about 4 hours southeast of the city, outside a little town called Farron. It's not some big tourist destination like Zion or Moab, so I figured it'd be quiet that time of year. The plan was to park on a side road, hike about 5 or 6 miles in, and just post up in a little meadow I'd marked on my map years ago. I remembered seeing it during a hike with a friend. Wide open clearing, surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides, with a small stream running through it. It was remote, peaceful, and a good spot to disappear into for a few days. I packed light but enough to last. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water, some extra clothes, a small propane stove, and a .22 pistol I kept for emergencies. I didn't expect to need it, but I liked having it. It was more for animals than people. I left early on a Thursday morning. The drive was uneventful. Once I hit Farron and passed through town, I followed a rough forest road for a while, parked near a trailhead, and loaded up. The air was crisp, leaves just starting to turn, and the only sound was wind in the trees. No other cars in the little dirt lot. That was a good sign. The hike in was rougher than I remembered. Maybe I wasn't as in shape as I used to be, or maybe it was just the pack weighing me down. Still, after about 2 hours, I finally reached the clearing. It looked almost exactly how I remembered it, just a little colder and quieter. I set up my tent near the tree line, close to the stream but not too close. It was just past noon, so I had plenty of daylight left. I gathered some firewood, set up my little camp chair, and boiled some water for coffee. The first day was calm. I read a little, walked around, watched the shadows stretch across the clearing as the sun dipped behind the hills. When it got dark, I lit a fire, ate a freeze-dried meal, and watched the stars for what felt like hours. There was something about being that far away from everything that made time feel slower. I slept like a rock that night. It was the second day that things started to shift. I woke up early, just as the sky was turning light. The air was freezing. I got the fire going again and made oatmeal. My plan for the day was simple: do nothing. Maybe hike around a bit, explore the woods to the north. I wasn't in a hurry. Around mid-morning, I followed the stream uphill for a while, tracing its path back into the woods. After maybe an hour of walking, I stopped. Something felt off. There was this quietness that didn't feel natural. No birds, no rustling. Even the stream felt quieter. It was the kind of silence you notice all of a sudden, like stepping into a room after someone turned off the music. I didn't see anything strange, but I felt like I wasn't alone. I turned around, scanned the woods. Nothing, just trees, fallen logs, pine needles underfoot. But still, I felt watched. I shrugged it off and started heading back. Maybe my nerves were just acting up. Maybe it was just because I was out there by myself. But even as I walked back to camp, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The rest of the day passed slowly. I kept to the clearing, chopped some firewood with the hatchet I'd brought, ate a little and tried to relax. I didn't go back into the woods. That night, I heard movement. It was late, probably close to midnight. I'd long since put out the fire and crawled into my tent. I was half asleep when I heard it. Branches snapping, not too far from the tent. My first thought was deer, maybe elk. But then I heard a more deliberate sound, like heavy steps on dry leaves. Not fast, but steady, human-like. I reached for the pistol, stayed frozen in my sleeping bag, listening. The footsteps circled slowly, not right up against the tent, but close enough to hear clearly. I didn't move, didn't even breathe heavy, just waited. Eventually, they faded. Whoever or whatever it was, it moved off into the trees. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When morning finally came, I stepped out and looked around. No tracks, nothing obvious. I felt a little foolish. Could have been an animal, sure, but something about the way it moved, slow, intentional, it didn't sit right. I debated packing up and heading back, but the stubborn part of me didn't want to run because of a sound in the dark. I told myself I'd stay one more night. I should have left. That third day, I didn't wander far, just stayed near the clearing, kept my pistol on me the whole time. I felt jumpy, every sound making me flinch. Even the wind felt sharp, like it carried something with it. I didn't see anything unusual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As the sun started going down, I built a bigger fire than usual. I didn't want shadows near the tent. I kept my chair near the flames and sat there for hours, scanning the edge of the clearing. Nothing moved, not at first. But then, just before I was about to put the fire out, I saw it. On the far side of the meadow, just where the woods start, there was a figure. Still, not moving, just standing there. I didn't move. My heart thudded in my chest. I blinked, hoping it was just a trick of the light. But no, it was a person. Too far to make out details, but close enough to see that they were just watching. Facing me, I raised the pistol even though they were probably too far for it to matter. I didn't say anything. I didn't yell. I just stood there, staring back. After maybe a minute, they turned and walked into the trees. I packed up everything I could that night, left the tent up, just grabbed my essentials, sleeping bag, pack, pistol, flashlight, and started hiking out. I didn't care how late it was. I didn't care how dark. I couldn't stay. The hike back was hell. I couldn't use the flashlight too much because I didn't want to give away my position if they were following. Every crack of a branch behind me made me freeze. I kept checking behind me, but I never saw anyone. Still, I didn't stop moving. It took me 4 hours to reach the trailhead. My legs were jelly, my hands numb from the cold. I threw my gear in the car, started the engine, and got out of there. I didn't report it. What would I say? That someone stood in the woods and watched me? That I heard footsteps? Nothing technically happened, but I knew I wasn't alone out there. The weirdest part is that when I checked online weeks later, I found a thread on a local hiking forum. Someone had posted a photo from that same area, dated just 2 weeks before my trip. In the background, half hidden in the trees, was a man standing still. Not part of the hiking group, just there, watching. I haven't gone back to that forest since. I still go camping sometimes, but never alone, never that deep. And I always listen to my gut now. If something feels wrong, it is. I was 31 when I went camping alone in the Salmon Chalice National Forest in Idaho. It was early October 2016. The air was cooler than usual for that time of year, and the sky had stayed gray most days. I had taken a week off from my job at a construction supply company in Bend, Oregon. where I'd been working since I was 22. I just needed a break from people, from noise, from everything. I thought a solo camping trip might help me reset. I didn't tell many people I was going. Just left a note with my sister, Marcy, and told her I'd be back by Sunday. I loaded up my old 2004 Tacoma with camping gear, tent, sleeping bag, food, water, stove, and a .38 revolver my dad had given me years back. I didn't expect to need it, but I brought it anyway. It had been drilled into me by him, a long-haul trucker who spent a lot of time in the middle of nowhere. Better to have it and not need it. I reached the forest on a Tuesday afternoon and drove down a long dirt road off the main highway. I followed it for a good 20 miles before I stopped at a clearing beside a stream. No other vehicles, no signs of people, no trails. I set up my tent, cooked some beans over a small propane burner, and watched the stream run by as the sky turned orange and then blue-black. The air was cold but dry. I slept okay the first night, even with the occasional snap of a twig in the dark. Wednesday, I spent the day walking around the area. I didn't hike far, just tried to get a feel for the landscape. Pines, brush, rocky hillsides, the stream running east to west. The quiet was thick. I only saw a single deer late in the afternoon. I remember thinking how different silence can feel when you're the only one around. It's not peaceful, really, presses in. But I liked it. That night it rained, just enough to wake me once or twice. I went back to sleep without much trouble, figuring it was just weather. By Thursday morning, I started thinking I should explore further out. There was a set of foothills about 3 miles north that looked interesting. I packed a small day bag with food, water, and a GPS unit I'd bought used at a pawn shop. I kept the revolver in my belt, just in case. It took about an hour and a half to hike to the base of the foothills. There wasn't a clear path, but I moved slow and kept track of my direction. My GPS worked well enough, though the map was kind of old, it still showed basic elevations and rivers. I noticed a dry gulch leading through the hills to what looked like another valley beyond. I figured I'd check it out. I had maybe 6 hours of daylight left. The gulch narrowed, then opened wide as I moved through. I had to scramble over some rocks and drop down a short ledge, maybe 5 feet, nothing serious. The sun was already past its highest point when I stepped into the new valley. It was quiet, colder than the other side. Less underbrush, more open ground with thin grass and dirt. Pines stood sparser here, scattered wide. The whole place felt different. Still, I walked toward a dead tree in the middle and stopped to eat a sandwich. That's when I noticed something off. There were tire tracks in the dirt. Faint but there. Not fresh but not too old either. Maybe from a week or two ago. I crouched and looked closer. They didn't look like off-road vehicle tracks. More like a small trailer or an ATV. There were no roads on this side, at least not on my GPS. I stood still and scanned the area. Didn't see any buildings. No movement. No sound either, not even birds. That made me uneasy. I started heading back the way I came, but I couldn't find the exact spot where I dropped into the gulch. The terrain looked different from this side. I backtracked and walked the edge of the foothills, looking for the ledge I'd come down. I must have walked a mile or more before I accepted it. I was turned around. I checked my GPS, but the screen had gone blank. It wasn't out of batteries, but it just refused to boot up. I tried holding the button, smacking it lightly. Nothing. Dead. I knew the direction back was southwest, so I started walking that way, hoping I'd hit the gulch again. I moved faster than I should have. My footing slipped a few times, and I scraped my hand on a jagged rock. Blood dripped from my palm, but I ignored it. I just wanted to get back. By the time I realized I was moving deeper into the wrong side of the valley, the sun was low. I should have stopped then, set up a quick shelter with the tarp in my day pack and waited for morning. But I didn't. I kept walking until it was too dark to see more than a few feet ahead. I stopped near a large boulder and curled up behind it. No tent, just my jacket and the tarp. I didn't sleep much that night. The cold was biting. I kept hearing little snaps in the brush. Maybe animals, maybe not. I held the revolver tight in my hand under the tarp. Morning finally came, pale and gray. I was tired, dehydrated, and pissed at myself. I picked a hill and climbed it slowly, hoping I could spot the gulch or anything familiar. From the top, I saw something that didn't make sense. A cabin, small, weathered, sitting against the base of a ridge maybe half a mile off. It had a tin roof and a chimney. No smoke, no lights, but it looked lived in. I walked toward it cautiously. As I got closer, I saw the cabin had a faded sign nailed to the front. "No trespassing. Stay out." Asterisk asterisk, the door was shut, windows boarded. But it wasn't falling apart. Someone had kept it up. There were no vehicles, no tire tracks near it, though I saw old ones trailing off behind the ridge. I circled the place, careful not to get too close. I didn't want to spook anyone if they were inside. But I didn't see movement, didn't hear a thing. I called out once, just a single hello, but got no answer. I didn't call again. I didn't want to hang around long. I turned back toward the direction I thought camp was, but I moved slower now, more careful. I didn't want to end up on someone's land, especially if they were the type to post a warning like that. Then, I saw something half buried in the brush a quarter mile from the cabin. A blue cooler. I walked over and opened it. Inside were empty cans of beer, a few old plastic bags, and what looked like moldy meat. It reeked. I dropped the lid and stepped back. Not a hunter's stash, just trash dumped and forgotten. Next to it, I found a shovel. Metal head, wooden handle. The wood was cracked. And beside it, a short hole in the ground, half filled in. It looked like something had been buried and then partly dug up. No bones, just clumps of earth and bits of black plastic. I moved fast after that. I didn't know what the hell was going on here, but it felt wrong. Every instinct told me to get out. I walked until my legs ached. I picked a ridge and climbed, hoping for another view. From the top, I finally spotted the gulch I'd come through 2 days before. I could see the ledge, the way the rocks formed a small break in the hill. Relief hit me like a wave. I climbed down, retraced my way back through the gulch. It was late afternoon when I finally reached the first valley again. My tent was still there, untouched. My truck too. I didn't waste time. I packed everything in minutes. My hands shook while I rolled up the sleeping bag. I started the engine, turned the Tacoma around, and didn't look back. That drive out felt longer than the drive in. Every bump in the dirt road made me flinch. Every shadow in the woods looked like someone watching. I hit pavement just as the sun dipped below the horizon. I didn't stop until I reached a small town called Salmon. I checked into a motel and sat in the shower for a long time, letting the hot water run over me. I never went back. Later that year, I reported the cabin to a ranger station in Chalice. Said I'd seen a structure that looked like it wasn't supposed to be there. The ranger just nodded and told me, "There's a lot of private land that ain't marked out there. Lot of folks like it that way." I didn't press it. I still think about that place sometimes. About the quiet valley, the cooler with rotting meat, the shovel, and the half-dug hole. I'll never know what went on there. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was something real bad. But I got out. That's all I needed. And I don't camp alone anymore. I was 27 when it happened. This was back in the fall of 2019 in rural West Virginia. I had been living out of my car for a while, not because I had no other option, but because I wanted to. It started as a short road trip after I left my job in Columbus. Then a month passed, and I was still on the road. I started camping out more and more often, parking at trailheads, sleeping in national forest campgrounds, or just pulling off to the side of gravel roads where it looked like no one had been in years. I liked being out there on my own. I had a tent, a sleeping bag that kept me warm even when it was cold out, and a small butane stove for coffee in the mornings. Felt quiet. Nobody expected anything from me. I didn't have to explain anything to anyone. I didn't owe anyone my time or attention. That kind of freedom is rare, and I clung to it. One night in October, the air was starting to turn. The leaves had already dropped in most places. That meant fewer people on the trails and fewer forest rangers roaming around. I liked that, but I also knew the cold would keep me from doing this much longer. I told myself I'd camp maybe 2 or 3 more times before heading south. That was the night I found the old graveyard. It wasn't on the map. I was on some back road about 10 miles outside of a small town called Dry Fork. My cell signal had been dead for hours, and I hadn't seen another car all afternoon. I had taken a narrow gravel road that twisted its way through a stretch of dense woods, and it was getting dark. I was looking for a flat patch of ground to pitch my tent before it got too late. I spotted a clearing through the trees and turned off the main gravel path onto what looked like an even older road, mostly overgrown. I crept forward slowly, tires cracking over dead sticks and soft leaves. That's when I saw it. It wasn't exactly hidden, but it wasn't obvious either. A small iron gate with a rusted chain hung open on one side. Behind it were maybe 20-30 headstones scattered across uneven ground. Some were leaning, some had broken in half. A few had been swallowed by the roots of trees growing up around them. It didn't look like anyone had visited in a long time. I know most people wouldn't have even considered it, but I had camped near weirder things. Abandoned barns, drained lakes, even a burned-down lodge once. At least this place was flat and quiet. The gate opened up into a fairly open area, and the tree canopy kept the wind off. It didn't bother me much that it was a graveyard. They were just stones, and the people under them had been dead for decades, maybe longer. I parked off to the side, far enough not to block the overgrown road, and walked through the graveyard with my flashlight, looking for a good spot to pitch my tent. I ended up setting it up in a flat area just outside the gate, beneath a big oak tree. It wasn't directly in the graveyard, just close to it. I could still see the stones when I looked out through the flap. I didn't think much about it. I was just glad I'd found a level patch of ground before it got pitch dark. I heated up a can of soup and ate it sitting on the little foam mat I carried with me. The only sound was the wind in the trees and a few insects still clinging on in the cold. There were no coyotes howling, no owls, nothing bigger moving in the brush. It was quiet in a way that made me notice it. I went to sleep early that night. Around 8:30 or 9 o'clock, the cold always makes me tired. I zipped myself up in my sleeping bag and pulled the hood tight around my face. The forest outside was pitch black. That first night, nothing happened. The second night was different. I woke up the next morning to gray skies. The air smelled damp, like it had rained a little overnight. My tent was dry, though. I boiled water for coffee and walked around the graveyard, just out of curiosity. Some of the stones were so old the words had worn off. Others had names I'd never heard before. Orson, Letty, Buford, all of them born in the 1800s. Most had died before 1930. Some of the graves were for kids, judging by the dates. That always gave me a weird feeling. I stopped looking after a while. I spent most of that day reading in the tent, bundled up in my sleeping bag with a small paperback I'd been carrying around for weeks. The woods were quiet again. The light didn't change much, just a dull, gray glow filtering through the trees. Around 5 o'clock, I made myself another dinner. This time some instant noodles and a few strips of jerky. I didn't realize until I was getting ready for bed that I hadn't seen a single plane or car or even a bird all day. It felt like I was the only person left in that part of the world. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept hearing things. Not animals, not the usual sounds of the forest, but something else. At first, it was just soft thumps, like someone stepping on the dirt outside the tent. I told myself it was probably acorns or branches falling. Then I heard something scrape. A slow, dragging noise came and went, then silence again. I held my breath and listened. Then there was a sound that snapped me fully awake. Metal against metal, like something tapping on the old iron gate. It wasn't loud, but in the dead quiet of that forest, it might as well have been a gunshot. I didn't move. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't even roll over. I just lay there, heart pounding, breathing as quietly as I could. My flashlight was within reach, but I didn't grab it. I didn't want to make a sound. Eventually, the noise stopped. I lay there for what felt like hours. Then somehow I drifted off again. The next morning, everything looked the same. The tent flap was zipped. No footprints, no signs that anyone or anything had been near me. I told myself it was my imagination. Maybe a raccoon. Maybe the wind blowing something loose. But part of me didn't believe that. Still, I stayed a third night. That was my mistake. Around dusk, I started to notice things that didn't sit right. There was a smell in the air that hadn't been there before. Not like dead animal or rot, just wrong. Like mildew and damp earth and something sour. I looked around, thinking maybe something had died nearby, but I didn't find anything. Then I noticed that one of the headstones had fallen over. I could have sworn it had been standing the day before. I didn't touch it, but it looked freshly tipped. The grass underneath was still green where the base had shielded it from the sun. I felt uneasy in a way I hadn't the night before. I kept checking over my shoulder, like someone was standing just behind me, but there was never anything there. That night, the sounds came back. This time, louder. Footsteps, crunching, more scraping, a dragging sound, like someone pulling something heavy across the ground. I sat up, clutching my flashlight, but I didn't turn it on. I waited. Then, out of nowhere, the gate clanged shut. It wasn't subtle. It slammed like someone had kicked it. I flinched hard and nearly dropped the light. My heart was in my throat. I didn't breathe. I waited, straining to hear. Then came the sound that scared me the most. Breathing, right outside the tent. Not close, but close enough. Deep, ragged, in and out, slow. I sat frozen for what felt like hours, trying not to move. Eventually, the sounds faded. The breathing stopped. The woods were silent again. When I finally worked up the courage to unzip the tent and look out, it was past 3 a.m. Nothing there. The gate was wide open again. That was it. I knew I couldn't stay. I packed my stuff in record time as soon as the sun came up. I didn't even eat. I just stuffed everything into the car, left the tent stakes in the ground, and took off. The drive back to the main road took almost an hour. That's how deep in I'd gone. When I finally hit asphalt again, I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in days. But I didn't go to a hotel. I didn't go to a campground or another trailhead. I drove straight to a Walmart parking lot, parked under the lights, and slept in the driver's seat. I never went back to that road. I couldn't even tell you how to find it again. I've tried looking at maps, retracing my steps, but nothing ever looks quite right. Like it doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it was just an old man, a hunter, or some off-grid weirdo living out there. Maybe they didn't like someone camping near the graves. I don't know. I never saw anyone. But the way the breathing sounded, the way the gate slammed, the fact that I never heard any footsteps leaving, that's what keeps me up at night sometimes. I don't camp anymore. Not alone. Not near graveyards. Not anywhere I can't leave fast. I still love the outdoors, but I stay in cabins now, or state parks with rangers nearby. I learned something out there in those woods. Something I can't explain but know is real. Some places are quiet for a reason. And when the quiet breaks, you better listen. And you better leave.